Four other soldiers are critical at the moment. The government facing this huge challenge of diffusing the situation on one hand, and on the other hand also, of course, putting out a firm resolve to protect and preserve the territorial integrity. A statement put out by the MEA said all efforts will be made to protect and preserve India's territorial integrity. Vinay Tiwari, Managing Editor of Mir Now, joining me now on the phone line. Vinay, the latest that we are reporting right now is the Prime Minister calling for an all-party meeting, coming at a time that it has. What do you make of this, please?
Yes, and there was some bit of clamor since morning by several opposition parties, both the Congress and the Shiv Sena have been talking about it since morning, some of the other political parties too, on why the government has not given out a formal statement on what happened. Remember, the statements that have so far come, two statements have come from the Indian Army, which basically spoke about the casualties that happened, whereas one particular statement had come from the MEA, but the Prime Minister's office or the Defence Minister had not exactly given any statement so far. The Rajnath Singh responded some short while back on Twitter. But the fact that this does and must involve the opposition parties, they need to be briefed on what the situation on the ground is and what exactly is the Indian government's position is critical. And the Prime Minister now, having asked for a meeting day after tomorrow, tells you the government needs to be prepared with all facts over the next couple of days or so, and then brief the opposition. Remember, Afrida, all the details have still not come from the location because the Indian Army is still trying to assess the situation. The terrain is extremely, undulating and difficult, and there is a river that, that exists there as well, where some people have feared that some of the soldiers actually fell into the river as well. So the full accounting has not really happened on the spot, and possibly that's the reason why the government wants to collect every detail possible from the location before they start briefing the opposition in a couple of days from now.
Yes. Absolutely, Vinay. Like you rightly pointed out, this is a stage where the government wants to be prepared with all the accurate facts before it comes up with any kind of consolidated statement. I also want to ask you that since the Defence Minister refrained from commenting on anything else in his statement, the first that we saw on Twitter, except for paying his glowing tributes to the martyrs.
Yes, and look, there can only be two possible reasons for it. One, the government is not clear of all details. As I said, that the sources within the Indian Army establishment are telling us that we still haven't heard all the specifics of what possibly happened there, including the count of number of injured as well. That assessment is still being made. We know, of course, about the 20 martyrs who lost their lives fighting for India. We now know their names. We have been able to identify those 20 to our sources in the army. But there is possibly more information that needs to be collected for a formal statement to be made by the Defence Ministry. That could be possibly a reason why he is stuck to just paying homage and not given any other specific out. The only specifics that we've heard so far are from the Indian Army, which confirmed the loss of life. And, of course, the Ministry of External Affairs, who made the position of Indian government clear on where they stand on this whole crisis, whether the Chinese having dishonored the de-escalation process and the agreed upon SOP, and also the fact that they were committed to protecting the Indian borders. Those were fairly routine statements that you would have expected the Ministry of External Affairs to issue at a time like this, Afrida.
Right, Vinay, finally, what do you think is the immediate challenge for the government now? Like you're saying that there must be a thorough assessment done before any public statements are made. Is the government now in that process of actually formulating a strategy, doing high-level meetings and deliberations and discussions with all parties? What do you think is the immediate challenge for the government at this stage?
Make no mistake, this is possibly the biggest challenge the government has faced, not just in this tenure, but possibly in the 6.5 years of governance that the current government has been in power. And the challenges now are on multiple fronts. The first challenge, of course, is to ensure the de-escalation. Remember, India has a very large, over 4,000-kilometer border with China. So the possibility of things, erupting in other parts as well is always there. So the first part is to contain any further escalation of any hostility on other parts of the India-China border. That is part one. Part two would obviously be to ensure that some amount of de-escalation exercise happens a little more seriously than what's happened so far and the situation on the ground is kept under control. Because when you have a loss of life to this level, and including a CO level officer, there is naturally an anger amongst the troops as well. And to keep their anger in check and their morale in check is something that is extremely critical. The second challenge, of course, is the geopolitical impact of a development like this. But the British High Commission today responded to it. That is something unusual. Normally, you would see the United States commenting on Indo-China matters, but the United Kingdom stays away from speaking directly and openly so quickly. We saw that happening as well. The United Nations has spoken about it as well. Yes. Also remember that India and China are very entwined in terms of the business and economy. And to decouple that is tougher as opposed to, say, Pakistan, because between India and Pakistan, there is no real corporate business involvement. All the businesses at the retail level where things like spices or some other dry fruits are exported and imported to each other, but there isn't any corporate business involvement. But India, China, that way have a much greater and deeper level of corporate business environment. So that decoupling is not easy. And you will have situations where the exchange of business and trade will possibly continue, or they would want to continue, because that just upsets and creates an enormous problem itself. You also have the challenge of managing information supply and the mood within India, with people also expecting answers from a government where they believe they deserve to know a bit more than what has been put out so far, Frida.
Absolutely, Vinay. Thanks very much for explaining to us the ramifications and the repercussions of the Indo-China clash that happened late on the night of 15th of June. Thanks for joining us. Let's also